Hi, this is a video about the ST terminal and an issue that I've come across and how you can fix it. Basically, the ST terminal is a simple terminal that you compile yourself, and if I come across to the config file and scroll down a bit, you'll notice there is a section in the config file that defines the terminal's name. Basically, when you open a terminal, if you type echo term, it's going to display the name of the terminal. So if I come across and open urxvt, for instance, over here, and then echo term, you'll see the name of the terminal is rxvt. Now, the reason why this is important is because when you when you build the terminal, what it does is it creates a I think it's a term info file. Basically, it adds settings to a database on the computer about how the terminal operates, so that when you use a terminal and you open different programs, the program knows how to communicate with the terminal. The problem is when you SSH into another machine, that machine may not have the, if it hasn't got ST terminal installed, it won't have the configuration in the terminal database for how that works, so you can get strange results. So what I'm going to do is come across and SSH into another machine and show you what the issue is. I've noticed this specifically affects the terminal if you're running the ZSH shell on both the client and the server. So what I'm going to do is SSH into a Mac that has got the ZSH shell set up as the default, and I'll show you what the issue is. If I now start typing, you'll see that the characters are printed twice. Obviously that's no good. If I come across to the urxvt terminal, it's working fine. Okay, so what's the issue? It's the same machine, it's the same setup. The only difference is the terminal we're using, and the difference is the when we SSH into the remote machine, we're identifying as the ST256 terminal, and the Mac doesn't have, because ST is not installed on that machine, it doesn't have the term info file to know how to communicate properly with the terminal. So basically you get these weird results like double characters being printed in the terminal, and this seems to especially affect the ZSH shell. It can't work out the width of the characters. So there's several ways around this. You could of course come in and when you build the ST terminal, change the term name to something like xterm256 color, but you don't want to do that, and the reason is because then applications that you use with the ST terminal will behave differently than if you had the term name set to ST256 color. For instance, I've noticed it when I'm launching videos from the command line. The MPV player behaves differently if you change the term name of the ST terminal. So you don't want to change the term name when you build it. Of course, you could in your ZSH file or bash RC file. If you're using bash, you could change the term name to whatever terminal you want, you know, term name equals urxvt or something. But if you change the term name either in the config for ST terminal or in your ZSH or bash RC file, ST terminal will behave differently. It won't behave the same way. So you don't want to do that. The other option that you can do is basically the issue is connecting the issue only happens when you're connecting from your client running the ST terminal to another machine that doesn't have ST installed. So the problem with the term name only happens when you're running SSH. So there's a couple of things you could do. You could, in your shush folder, there's a file called environment where you can set environmental variables that get passed from the client to the shush server, but that's only works if the shush server is running SSH version 2 and it might not accept the environmental variables. So you could, in your shush environmental variables file, set the term name to xterm, for instance, but that would then affect all applications that are using SSH when you're running it through the terminal, so you don't want to do that. There's another option that you could do. On the remote machine, you could, for instance, on the remote machine, what you could do, for instance here, I've got this commented out, is you could do if term equals st256 color, then term equals xterm256 color. So you could, on the remote machine, set that in the ZSH or bashrc file of the account you're dialing into. But if you've got a lot of accounts, a lot of machines you're dialing into, that's not really an option. So I'm going to show you the simple fix, which doesn't require setting up anything on the server or any complicated configuration, and that is actually going to be using tmux. So normally you'd use tmux when you'd SSH into a server. You'd SSH into a server and then you'd start tmux and then start a command that's going to run a long time. You could then detach from the tmux session and quit the exit SSH, and then return later on and reconnect to the tmux session, and the command would still be running. But what we're going to do in this case is we're going to run tmux on the client, which is running the ST terminal, before we start the SSH session into the remote machine. And I'll show you why that is. So I'm running the ST terminal here. What I'm going to do is just switch across to my tmux configuration file, and what you can do is in the tmux configuration file you can set the default terminal name, so you can set it to like screen256 color. If you don't set that, it will default to using the default terminal name of screen. So I've got that commented out because I found setting the colors in tmux interfered with using 256 color, gave me some issues with some programs I was using. So you don't actually need to set the term in tmux. It will, by default, when you run it, it will use the term name screen. So I'll show you what I mean. I'll echo the term name of this here. This is the ST terminal. You can see here we're running, it's being identified as ST256 color. Now if I SSH into the machine, you can see when I type I get double characters, okay? And I said that's because the Mac doesn't understand this terminal identifier. It doesn't have a record of it, so that's why it's not interacting properly with the terminal. So the solution is, what we're going to do is we're going to run tmux before we SSH into the machine. So if I now run tmux, and if I now echo term, you'll see it's identified as screen, okay? If I now SSH into the machine and I type, no double characters, and I can now exit that. I'll exit tmux, and that's basically because we changed the terminal identifier, and this is the best way to do it because you're not you're not changing the term name in your ST config file, which will cause the ST terminal to behave differently on your local machine. You're not overriding the term name in your ZSHRC file or bashrc file, again, which will cause problems with ST locally. And you don't have to set up anything on a server. You don't have to make any changes on the server. You don't have to install ST or try and copy the term info file across, or go through each ZSH or bashrc file on each account to add a bit of if then code that will, you know, detect if it's the ST terminal and then switch it to xterm. You can just do it on the client, and it will work for all the servers you're connecting to. And again, basically the difference is, if I come across to tmux, again, you can change this. If I set this to screen 256 color, and then I run tmux again, echo term, you see it 256 color. I'll try SSH, and you can see that's working as well. So I'll quit that. In newer versions of tmux, you can also change this to tmux 256 color, but not all servers might recognize that, so you're probably better sticking with screen 256 color, or you can just comment it out, or you probably don't have it by default in your tmux config file, in which case when you run tmux, it's just going to say it's just going to return the screen. So that's the difference between the term variable set in tmux and when you're not in tmux. Echo term, and you can see it's reported to ST256 color. And basically the issue, as I said, is that the remote machine, because it doesn't have the ST terminal on, if I could switch across to the ST config file, there's a make file down here. If I come down to the bottom, I think it's somewhere down the bottom, yeah, here. When you build the ST terminal, it uses a program called tick, which is installed when you install ncurses. And what tick does is it creates the ST info file, which is the sort of identifier for the ST terminal. It I think, to simplify it, kind of puts it in some kind of database of all terminals on your machine, so that when you're running the ST terminal, the programs look at this and they know how the ST terminal works and how to communicate properly with it. And the issue is, because you haven't built the ST terminal on the remote SSH machine, it doesn't have this term info file, and so it doesn't know how to communicate properly with the ST terminal. So that's the issue that arises sometimes when you're using a slightly obscure terminal. Although the ST terminal's been around for quite a few years, it may, because you have to compile it and build it yourself, it's not really included in the repositories for that different operating systems use for their software. So they don't, the servers don't then have a record of the ST terminal, how it works. When you install different packages, when you build the server, it won't have a record of the ST terminal in the sort of database of terminals that it knows how to work with. So that's why just running tmux is a solution. It will just basically report itself as the screen term name, and you won't get any double characters, whereas if I exit out of that, and this is as the ST terminal, you can see we get the double characters. So that's basically the easiest way to fix the problem, is to run tmux locally before you SSH into the remote machine, and that will fix the st term name issue with the server not recognizing the st terminal's term name, and so perhaps behaving in odd ways. And I found this happens especially if you're running the ZSH shell on both the client and the server, and especially seems to affect Mac OS when it's running as the server with the ZSH shell. So that's basically the problem and the fix for using ST over SSH if you're getting any strange behavior or double characters in the terminal.